welcome to our class session for Psalm 1. And what we'll do for this session, probably the other ones as well, is I will begin by reading the psalm in translation, and then I'll have some comments on it, and then we'll have some space for some reflections on it, particularly from a religious humanist standpoint. So for this reading, I'm going to do this from the New JPS translation, which I believe is 1985 or so, but it's a pretty decent translation. So it reads, "Happy is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, or taken the path of sinners, or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of the Lord is his delight, and he studies that teaching day and night. He is like a tree planted beside streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose foliage never fades, and whatever it produces thrives. Not so the wicked. Rather, they are like a chaff that wind blows away. Therefore, the wicked will not survive judgment, nor will sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord cherishes the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed." Well, I have to say, from this religious humanist perspective, this begins right away with some real challenges. So before I delve into that side of it, I want to kind of dig in a little more into some of the wording, particularly in Hebrew, that has sometimes in translation we don't catch all the nuances. So we'll talk about some of that. The first word, how this begins, I believe the word is ashrei. I think I'm not great at Hebrew vowels, so I could be wrong. I believe it's ashrei. It's translated in this version as happy, in many other versions happy, but in many others versions they translate it as blessed. Now what's interesting with the use of this word here is that it's used quite a bit in wisdom literature, but especially it's used 25 times in Psalms and 8 times in Proverbs. And again, it's very much in this wisdom kind of context. So that's the first thing. And we're really, unlike many of the other Psalms we'll read later that are structured more as prayers, as songs, this one is more of a statement of wisdom, a poem that has meaning, but it's still a statement of wisdom. And one of the commentaries I looked at said that this psalm may have been added later on. It was not part of the original collection, but was added later on as a bit of a preface, as providing kind of a key to understanding the rest of this collection. And that commentary also argued that this particular psalm was particularly inspired by the broader wisdom literature tradition that spoke a lot about wisdom and also spoke a lot about what it means to be happy. And I find that really intriguing because in our modern era, there's a lot of books written about the subject of happiness. There's been a lot of research lately on how do we quantify happiness? How do we measure it? There's even been talk of a happiness index that could be used instead of some more traditional ways of measuring countries and economies with GDPs and whatnot. Instead of a happiness index is looking at better measures that talk about how people happy or not. And so it's interesting to me that sometimes these ancient issues are also very modern issues. Another word that comes up in the text is derek, or way. And we see here this picture of a parallel paths. A happy man who goes one path and then another path that leads to unhappiness. And the unhappy path, the words here just talk about the wicked, the sinners, the insolent. Now, as we'll talk about later, I have some qualms about how this is framed. But nonetheless, this is how the text is framed. It's really describing two different paths in very poetic ways. Now, we talk about the happy person, and I should add here the language specifically is happy man. Again, this is the patriarchal nature of the text. But it's with this happy person, this happy man, says who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, in other words, chosen a different path, hasn't followed these dangerous paths over here, but had gone the good path. And it mentions especially studying the teaching of the Lord, this teaching day and night. And this here, in fact, let me look at it in Hebrew. I'm pretty certain this is talking specifically about Torah, is the word in Hebrew. In fact, I guess it's in verse 2. It says, rather the teaching of the Lord. I think in Hebrew it's Be Torot. And then the next line down, it talks about Ve Be Torot Objector, I think. Again, I apologize for anyone who really knows Hebrew. My vowels, I always forget the vowel markings. But anyway, Torah is what it's talking about here. An important thing here is that Christians read this and assume it refers to law as a literal translation, but a better translation might be teaching or guidance. One key element here, looking at some commentaries, said that it's really important to remember that from a Jewish tradition, the idea of Torah was meant as a liberating path, a way to happiness, a way to enlightenment. It wasn't seen as an onerous, burdensome set of laws, but rather more of helpful guidance. Nonetheless, how Psalm 1 depicts this, it's very much life and death, very much you go a good path or you go a bad path. Now, this good path uses beautiful poetic language, describes this as being like a tree planted beside streams of water. Now, what does that mean? Think of the ancient world, particularly in the world where this text was composed. It was a land of extreme contrast, of desert, stark desert, and then water. The oasis, or the stream, or the river, and at those places, things were green. Imagine the contrast here between the darkness, starkness of the desert compared to the greenness. And the author here is trying to depict this kind of jolt, this kind of shock. And it talks about how that in this context, this tree yields fruit in season. It never fades. Whatever it produces thrives. So we're giving this very idealized, glowy picture of what the righteous person looks like. Now, my critical eye looks at this and says, no. I know a lot of righteous people who suffer. I know a lot of righteous people who were sent to the gas chambers, a lot of righteous people who are in jail for the sake of conscience. Being righteous doesn't always lead to goodness, good outcomes in this world, at least. But nonetheless, that's how the text depicts it here. Now, we have the next set of texts talks about this contrasting, the bad way, talks about not so the wicked. In other words, negating everything that came before about the righteous. Says rather they're like the chaff that the wind blows away. Again, for here, imagine a head of wheat. If you've ever seen up close a head of wheat, you'll notice inside there are the little kernels of grain, but they're surrounded by this straw-like material. And if you have a head of wheat, you grind it together, and if you do that long enough, those flaky, the straw around it breaks down, and it blows into the wind. This is the chaff it's talking about. It's disposable. It's not nutritious. It's not helpful. It goes on to say, the wicked will not survive judgment, nor will sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord cherishes the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed. So, in this text, we're seeing a theology that's arguing that God is on the side of the righteous will prosper, the wicked will not. Now, I find it also interesting that this particular psalm is negated later on in the same collection of texts, in the stories of exile, the stories of the Jews who were off in Babylon, mourning for the times that had gone by, mourning for the land that they were parted from. And the depiction there is that these were righteous people. And so we are already seeing dissonance here. Now, reading this, and now we're moving more into the commentary, discussion, reflection part of this. In this text, we really see these two paths of the righteous versus the wicked. Now, I think another way of reading this would be to say, is this righteous versus wicked, or is it obedient versus insolent? Is it dutiful versus rebellious? Is it willing to play by the rules or willing to buck authority? I think it's a great question. And if we look at the history of humanism, humanism has been all about humans taking control of their own destiny. And I look at the commentaries, and I'm going to pull up one right now that I was reading right before this, and it was really interesting how it was phrased here. So let me pull this up. It spoke of, let's see, I had this right here in front of me. Oh, never mind, it's right here in front of me on here. And I'm going to read a little bit. And this is from the New Interpreter's Bible, a commentary in 12 volumes, volume 4. In the reflection section for Psalm 1, it says, what is so unsettling about all of this is what Psalm 1 and the rest of the Psalter call wickedness is perhaps what North American culture promotes as the highest virtue, autonomy. What generally marks maturity among contemporary North Americans is self-sufficiency, Wanting or needing help, whether from others or from God, is taken as a sign of weakness or instability. The effect is to produce a society of isolated selves. The irony is tragic. The pursuit of self-fulfillment yields self-alienation. See Mark 8:35. In her story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, Flannery O'Connor strikingly portrays the way of the wicked. When a character called the Misfit is asked why he does not pray, he replies, "I don't want no help," he said. "I'm doing all right by myself." The misfit represents what Psalm 1 and the rest of the Psalter call wickedness, the conviction that we are doing all right by ourselves, that we need no help. It is not surprising that the misfit's words conclude the story. It's no real pleasure in life. He is telling the truth. Failing to trust God and make connection with God as a source of life, persons cannot be happy. It is not surprising that contemporary societies of isolated selves consistently fail to produce people who are happy, even though those societies are among the wealthiest, healthiest, and most educated in human history. In biblical terms, to be autonomous, to be alienated from God and other people, is to perish. The choice presented by Psalm 1 is always contemporary. We may choose to be self-instructed and self-directed. We may choose to open ourselves to God's teaching and to God's direction. We'll stop there. Good point. Stop. I think that's a pretty decent alternative reading of this, to argue that what this is talking about is the sense of connectedness, and that the happy person described in Psalms 1 is the one who is listening to guidance, listening to wisdom, listening to Torah. On the other hand, I have to say autonomy has some real merits. I think a lot of what many of us are drawn to in our moment in time is we are tired of being told what to do by people who may not have our best interests at heart, who may not have our family's best interest at heart, may not have our community's best interests at heart. In other words, the issue is not that we are stubbornly insolent just for the sake of being insolent, but rather we want to listen to the right guidance, not the wrong guidance. And so my take on this, my religious humanist perspective on this, is to say that we can read this in multiple ways. A helpful way to read this is to say that the happy person described here is the one who listens to good guidance, who listens to the wisdom of others, and who cares and is connected. The wicked person is the one who is so defiant to do it their own way, who's not willing to listen to wisdom, that they're going to go down bad paths. I think that's the best way of reading the text. I think the more wooden way of reading it, emphasizing dutiful obedience versus rebelliousness, I don't think it's so helpful myself. That's a reading that I can't get behind, because I think there are times when we must object. And yes, that's the name of our church, the Objector Church, because we think there are times you must object, you must push back, you must take a stand for something. So I guess that's where we'll leave it at today. Would love for you to join this conversation. If you see this video on social media, please make a comment, post on it. Just a reminder, this class is part of the course offerings of the Objector Institute, the educational wing of the Objector Church. It's this series of courses. The Daily Psalm is offered free to independent adult learners who want to learn for their own reasons. If you want academic credit, shoot me an email, james@objector.church, and I can send you a syllabus and talk about the process of registering if you want to take this as for academic credit from our school. We are unaccredited, so it may or may not transfer to another school, but it is something that would go towards the programs of our school here with the Objector Church. So anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, and we are aiming to have these every weekday, Monday through Friday, until we get done with the Book of Psalms. So we have a long ways to go. Again, appreciate your comments, and stay tuned tomorrow.